morning. How are you? Thank you for coming in early for our session tonight. Hi, Mary Kialo. Hi, Wanja. Hi, Windy. Please text us in the chat. There's a chat box at the bottom of your screen or at the top of your screen, depending on what you're using. You can let us know where you're watching us from tonight. Yes, so just tell us your name, let us know where you're watching us from, and where you're joining us from. Welcome, welcome. It's 7:03. We're going to give 5 minutes to a few people to join us, and then we can begin. We're so excited about this wonderful topic for entrepreneurs who are just transitioning from employment to entrepreneurship, and for you who is curious and interested in the transition and how it goes and what you can do about it. So thank you for joining us again. All right, a bit of ground rules. You have some provisions on your end. This is a webinar, so you're not allowed to speak, but you can let us know your thoughts and your opinions through the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen or at the top of your screen if you're using your computer. There's also a Q&A box where you can ask questions during the session or at the end of the session, and they'll be answered by our very able panelists. You can also raise your hand and you'll be selected to speak. I can give you speaking rights and you can be able to share what you would want us to know. So thank you again for coming early. I will All right, we'll start in a bit. Thank you. All right, so I think we can start now. And before we begin, I'll just call on to my colleague, Wendy, who will take us through this session. Wendy is the community officer at the Sandbox. She handles the community, makes sure everyone is okay. Maybe just an overview of Sandbox. Sandbox is a community of over 35 different business people who provide professional services to entrepreneurs, both independently and together, and they help entrepreneurs grow and scale. And we're located at CMS Africa House in Kilimani, Chania Avenue. Wendy, welcome.
Okay, Wendy, we can't hear you.
Technology. Wendy was kicked out for a bit, but now she's back.
So I have
Okay, Wendy, seems you're still muted. No, there's still no sound. No.
For the technology challenges that we're experiencing tonight. I hope you can hear me clearly now. Someone has ticked. I can't hear. Hi, Jerome. Hi, Herbert. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, please let me. Okay, yes, Mary. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. If you can hear me, thank you so much. So our session tonight will be with Herbert and Joram. Joram, yes, thank you so much, Michael. Please let us know where you're watching and listening to us from in the chat. Thank you so much as well. So our session tonight will be done by Joram and Herbert on transitioning from corporate to being an entrepreneur. And Herbert is currently our startup strategy expert here at the Sandbox. So he works mainly with startups. Yeah, so people who are transitioning, you have the idea, he's your guy. And Joram, as most people know him, he's known as the chief entrepreneur. So I'll read out Joram's bio. Joram Minamo is the CEO of Sandbox International and co-founder of Wild International. He stands at the forefront of Africa's entrepreneurial renaissance as the CEO of Sandbox, a pioneering organization dedicated to providing comprehensive and sustainable support for entrepreneurs with over 2 decades of experience in strategic planning and consulting. Joram has become a distinguished figure and renowned for his innovative and inspirational approach to business development. As a strategic planning consultant, Joram has devoted his career to work with African SMEs, contributing significantly to the growth and success of numerous organizations across the continent. His expertise encompasses a wide array of skills and including organization development, business strategy development and implementation, leadership development, entrepreneurship development, and organization culture. Please put your hands together for Joram. Our next speaker is Herbert, and Herbert is the CEO and co-founder of Answer Africa, a startup advisory that works with startups to ensure growth and sustainability of businesses. They have today worked with 340 businesses across the continent and are scaling. At Sandbox, Herbert is the startup strategy expert working with startups here. Thank you so much, Herbert and Joram, for agreeing to join us tonight. And I just want to start by a question to Herbert, because I think Joram left us for a bit. So to Herbert, thank you so much, Joram. So I'll start out with Herbert, just asking for you, was it a transition, or you dove into entrepreneurship direct without being employed at the beginning?
Yeah, thank you so much, Wendy. So the journey of transition, I think, is one that is maybe not spoken about loudly enough, in my opinion, because there is so much that is unknown but sort of known at the same time. So as you transition, as I'll talk about my journey, as I was transitioning from employment, which was comfortable, it was nice, I had a salary. I knew that on the 29th of every month, I was good to go. I had standing orders that were just, set up. In my mind, because I was around a corporate environment, there's the way we launch and build products, and I had a team behind me. I had an army literally behind me to help me do my work. Um, Part of me had used part of that thinking to help me think of what my business should be. So in my mind, it was very clear. When I started my business, I knew what the first 6 months were going to be like. I knew what the next 18 months were going to be like. I had my capital put on one side. Um, I had people that I knew I'd poach at some point. I had a level of clarity leaving employment. And it's different for different people. Remember, employment sometimes is forced. I mean, entrepreneurship sometimes is forced. And we saw this a lot during COVID when, a lot of folks um, jumped into entrepreneurship out of a lack of choice. But mine was from my own choice. But the reality is, when you do go into this journey, there are certain unknowns that no one tells you about. And so I can tell you it was not easy. There are a lot of things I wish somebody had told me because I would have wasted less time and money, and just energy, general energy. But yeah, it was not easy, Wendy. And I can tell you, there are a lot of things hopefully we can discuss today that can help other entrepreneurs not go through the same thing.
Thank you so much, Herbert. So something I'm just picking up is, first of all, there was a plan for you to transition from full-time to being an entrepreneur, and there was a lot of clarity. As much as sometimes it's lack of choice, but there was a lot of clarity in this transition. And Joram, thank you so much for joining us today. So for you, because you've been doing this for over 20 years now, maybe. So for you, was it a transition? You're like, okay, I've had enough. Did you have the clarity? Did you have a choice? What was it like for you?
Okay, I think my journey was a bit different. I think I was only employed for about 3 or 4 years before I jumped into entrepreneurship. So I relatively jumped out a little bit earlier, although thanks to Isaac that I was a part of, my job was international. And so I was coming off a job in Norway, pretty good job, was traveling a lot, doing a lot in Europe. But I had always known that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so I, like a lot of the money that I was making earlier would come towards, setting up the business, paying for certain things here and there, for branding here, for this, that, and the other there, paying for office, supporting a few things. And I also had my co-founder who had jumped out a year before I did and started running the business. So I was not coming onto a vehicle that was stationary. It was a business that was already running. And so I joined the business in about 2007. It was a whole transition from the international job that I had. There's a lot. In fact, to be very honest, I think I was 50-50. And for me, it was more, I ended up in the entrepreneurship because the job opportunities, I thought I would come back and maybe get a job and work for a little bit before I joined the business. But the job opportunities didn't come as quickly. And then at some point, I had been going to the office where the side hustle was, and the business had started growing. So at some point, even when people started calling me for interviews, I was just like, I think I've already gotten in too deep in this thing. So I might as well just go with it. And so this was 2007. And if you remember, at the end of 2007, something happened. So we went into post-election violence. Let's just say the next 5 years were not funny at all. And I just got married that year as well. So it was there are a few surprising things. Nothing went according to plan, is what I'm trying to say. So it was quite rough getting up and running, and in between, always being faced with the decision of, am I going to go back into employment, or is this thing going to work? Eventually it has. I don't know if my wife joined this conversation to tell us what the experience was for her on her side. But no, as Herbert said, it was very rough. It was nothing like I could ever have expected to happen.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, it was very rough, and we see the roughness has paid off to where you are as business owners today. So, in that moment of transitioning, especially for Herbert, because I think Herbert you'd been employed for a while. So, what were you considered? What some of the things you put into place, like they were non-negotiables for you to transition? This has to be in place. This has to be in place. And what are some of the things you are willing to compromise and say, okay, this one I can compromise. I can make my way without it. What were some of the non-negotiables? What did you consider? And what were, okay, fine, we can carry on without them. Herbert?
Yeah, there's some things I think as somebody who had, maybe my story was a little different from Joram for sure. And Joram, I didn't know that, but we are 10 years apart in terms of our journey, because I joined entrepreneurship in 2017, which, as you can imagine, was another different sort of time, election time, and we went. I don't know if you guys remember, but it was the time we had 2 elections in 1 year, so that was a terrible time to leave employment. But I guess, on the question of non-negotiables, I think that's a really good question, because I think for most people who are employed, the non-negotiables are very non-negotiable, because you're used to a certain way of living, certain lifestyle. I, for one, was used to a regularity. I can't tell you how much I sort of missed that, right? The idea of some things are just timed. You know, some things happen at certain times. There's a prestige that comes with certain jobs, and maybe just like Joram was saying, I think for me, one of the non-negotiables was around income. I was very clear in my mind that, we should not go below this level of income. And maybe, especially for folks who are thinking about the transition, it's a big, big, big point, because especially if you have a family, you've got kids, you've got, people who depend on you. It is one of those that I know all guys here will have as a sticky point. Now, put this in this context, right? So you have 80% of businesses that will start today will not make it to the end of the year. If you think about the latest statistics, it's like, in Kenya, we are registering 470 businesses a day, and out of those, 90% will not make it to the end of the year. So you can imagine, put that in context. You're starting a business. A big part of being employed, especially for a while, and maybe Joram didn't have that, is I had an air of I am special because I'm well trained. I've gone to trainings until my ears, and I've done it. I've opened country offices. I'm special. I'm not in that 90%, but yeah, I mean, like, the reality is that there are certain fundamentals on the ground, especially around how entrepreneurship works in our African context, that is just not written about or talked about enough. And part of those realities, and I'll give you a very simple one, is in terms of how people pay you, right? And the beauty about, I guess, being in employment for a while is you might even leave with clients. You might even start the business with 3, 4, 5 clients, right? And that's the benefit that most employed folks have, because they have a huge network already of folks who are willing to support them. However, they don't work on your clock, right? So 30th means diddly squat to them. It's just another date. And so what happens is cash flow becomes one of the biggest killers of transitioning businesses, because you're just not designed at that stage to absorb cash flow shocks. because of the regularity that you're used to, the idea that somebody can pay you 30, 60, 90, 120 days later, yeah, it's not something that maybe from the get-go you're ready for. Even if you plan for it, it's one thing, it's another thing than going through it.
Maybe I can chime in here. Because as Wendy was talking about what are your non-negotiables and stuff, I was just smiling and laughing to myself, because now this is in hindsight. I mean, there's a lot of things you learn in hindsight, and I listen to radio talk shows, I listen to certain people, advising people on how to set up a business, and there's this thing that always comes up, that you need to set aside 6 months of income of your budget to be able to afford, at least 6 months of living expenses before you jump out and start a business, and many other idealistic and mythical stories. Let me tell you, you can never be fully prepared, even if you have that 1 year runway of income that you have saved, because sometimes, you have this job that pays you very well and you can be able to set aside that kind of money. So I've seen all sorts of scenarios, because I've coached a lot of entrepreneurs. I've trained and coached a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think maybe we'll talk about it later in terms of how you could prepare a little bit better for the jump from employment to entrepreneurship. But let me just tell you, nothing can ever prepare you for what it is that you're going to face. Even if you've set aside that income and you're like, I need to have a runway and all sorts of things, there's so many things that can just change in that journey where you get started, and either you end up wiping out that money immediately. I remember when I came back from Norway, I think I had a bit of a buffer. We had some money we had set aside. In fact, I got married that year, and we didn't necessarily need people to contribute for our wedding and all those sorts of things. Like we had set aside some stuff, not necessarily to cushion the entrepreneurship journey, but we had some stuff set aside. But then now post-election happened, and let me tell you, I remember for 6 months, I don't think the business made a single cent of money. And so even if we were like seriously prepared during that period, everything got wiped out quite quickly. And before we recovered, it took a while. I think I fell ill that year. Like there are just so many things that were completely unforeseen that stepped into that journey. So it didn't matter how prepared I was. I was gung ho. I was like, yeah, I have contacts in this city. I'm going to go out and get the jobs and all sorts of things. But we were just in a scenario where nothing was going to move. I think it was up until May of that year that between the two principals or something, and things started moving again. But up until then, everyone was on a wait and see mode. Nobody was making any decisions. So there was literally no business happening. And then we had to rebuild from scratch. So I don't know that you can ever be prepared enough, even if you put your non-negotiable saying, at least I have to maintain my lifestyle and all sorts of things at this level. In my opinion, all that can change overnight. And I've seen it happen for a lot of people who make that jump where they're just not prepared. They think they would make the jump, and maybe from month one, they start to make an income that's able to help them sustain their lifestyle at where they were when they left employment. I can tell you very few businesses in Nairobi can, for example, start out at a level where they can pay you, let me even say it, like more than 100K a month. Like by the time you're getting clients and there's enough cash flow, one to you if you have an office, one to you if you start out and you've hired people, one to you if you're in an industry where people are paid in those 60, 80, 180 days, you'll be in for a reckoning. You will learn a lot of very tough lessons, and I think become a philosopher during that period. It's the only thing that keeps you sane and keeps you going, because you can't just understand why people just can't pay you your money. You've delivered the job, you've done it. Why aren't they paying you your money? Why are they holding on to your money? And you have people to pay and they don't seem to care. Why people you've hired to get a job done don't just do it to the expectation that you had, despite the fact that when you're employed, you were in a system that gave you the kind of employees who would jump at whatever it is that you said. So I think entrepreneurship is just a completely different ballgame, completely different universe. And in my opinion, listening to the grim statistics that Herbert shared with us, that first year is basically spent recalibrating what you believed about entrepreneurship, which is that nothing goes according to plan. Uh, I have dealt with extremely few cases. I would say less than 1% of entrepreneurs I've dealt with would start out with that boom where they get, like a big deal right at the beginning and get paid a lot of money, and they're able to sustain their lifestyle at where they are. But majority of what I see is, somebody who maybe worked for a company where they would get new laptops and phones every year or every 2 years. Now we'll spend 7 to 10 years with that old machine and keep repairing it for as long as possible. Instead of even just putting aside 60K to buy a new machine, they will hang on to that old machine, that old phone, unless it's extremely necessary. You start to learn the value of money in a business, and you start to learn that money doesn't actually come easy, and you really have to manage it in a very tight way. So in my opinion, no matter how much preparation you do, and no matter what kind of position you had before, whether you are an executive in a C level or manager or whatever it is, there's a lot of shock waiting for you in that journey of entrepreneurship.
Thank you so much, Jerome and Herbert. First of all, I've learned today that there's something called the air of I am special. And I'm going to keep saying, I think I'm in the percent of the air of I am special. And that's, I think, a cushion that being employed gives you. But there's also the part of you'll never be fully prepared. As much as you put in all the plans possible, as Jeremy said, but for 6 months, even after post-election, some of the external factors that come in as you run your business may affect you that you don't have control over. So as much as you're prepared with all the plans possible, there are things that are out of your control. So now there are things that for, like in this space, success as an employee and success as an entrepreneur could be very different. You could be, as Herbert said, opening offices across the world, everywhere. And when you start your business, you can't even get an office. Like Joram said, even getting that office is a challenge in itself. So how do we manage expectations? Because there's also the managing of the expectations that you have that, if I won and I succeeded in, being the best, being that person who opens 2 offices a year in different countries, I think I can hack with my business. And that's an expectation we need to manage in that regard. So how do we manage those expectations just to make sure that we are also not disappointed as we transition? So I'll give it to Herbert.
Maybe I can go first on this one.
Yes.
Let me go first on this one. Herbert can follow up. I think there's something we take for granted, which is that the company you are employed already had very many things set up of a very that actually props you up to succeed. Okay, so you're in this position, and there are so many things that you don't realize. This company has an entire HR division. When you need, HR kicks into action. They put out ads because your company is a good brand. Very many good people apply, and so they are selecting from thousands of applications, and they select the best 3 people. And then they them to you. So you just even do the final interview. You don't even know what sifting went through their 1,000 people, the 3. They have all these psychometrics they've already done. So at the end of the day, you interview the last 3 people. They join you, and you get working. You find the organization already has systems. You don't even have to think about where that person's computer comes from. But the day they are arriving, HR has already gotten a package for them. They get a T-shirt and what, a laptop. They are set up in comes, sets them up in the email and all sorts of things. And you get it. And what I'm just trying to allude to is you don't realize how much the systems set up in that business support you to succeed. By the time you're going to sell a product or a service to another company, they already recognize your company's brand. You're Safaricom, you're PwC, you are Shell, you are this. So even by the time you enter, you're not explaining, oh, we are company X, you start from scratch, or we do XYZ. You just mention, I'm from PwC, and everyone sits up and they're ready to listen to you. Because that brand comes with some kind of, aura and expectation. And so we really take for granted that the organizations we work for before we set up our own have so many systems, processes, and a brand set up to help us succeed. So in many cases, we mistake the success that we achieve in that organization, and we happily put it in our CV. Achieved growth of this to that. I added sales by X% to to my role and all sorts of things. And so you can walk out of that organization thinking that those results were yours. And so when you walk out, like Herbert was saying, feeling special, you walk out and you think that when you set up your own business, you think that people were buying you. You think that people were buying, your genius and your prowess. Shock on you. When you set up Company X, small Company X, Joram and Sons, and then you go back to that very same guy who you were selling to when you were at Shell, and he was treating you with reverence, my friend. He is not going to treat you with the same reverence he treated you when you were at Shell. And that's when the hard reality begins to hit you, that the reason you used to get gifts during Christmas of special pens and everything was because you worked for Shell, not because you were Joram. And so part of the early shock is how the very same network that you expect to support you in business doesn't come through as you expect. Yes, they'll open doors for you because you have their numbers, you'll go and pitch, but then you'll begin to realize, there are procedures that have to be followed. You need 4-year audits to be a supplier in that very same company that you worked in, and you're the one who set up those procedures because of risk management. Now you realize the procedures you set up lock you out from being able to be a supplier in that very same company. So you need another 4 years before you can go back to the same company you worked for and access opportunities from there. So you just realize, like I said, entrepreneurship is a completely different ballgame. There are so many things that lock you out. And so you just basically have to start building your credibility and your track record and that documentation from scratch, which means there are many places you'll not be able to access the same business opportunity you thought you'll access. The same people who treated you with reverence, now that you're not in that brand anymore, they don't pick up your calls. They don't give you the meetings that you expected they were going to give you. Even if they're polite enough to invite you for the meeting, they are really not telling you that, for real, we can't give you this deal because the deals we already have in the organization belong to certain people in the organization, and there's no way someone new is coming in just like that. And many other stories like that. And so the reality begins to hit you that to get those clients will take a bit longer and a lot harder work than you had assumed you would have to do, simply because you are not the brand that you used to work for.
Hey,
Yeah, let me
okay.
just
Yes.
add, Wendy. Let me just add one point on that. I think one of the things that we talk about a lot with Joram is the concept of the fallacy or the myth of entrepreneurship. I think, and part of it is, have you seen all these books that talk about entrepreneurship? This beautiful books, that talk about, how to start a business. They talk about running a business, lean methodology, and all these really cool books, which are some of them which I really like. I think that's part of the problem, because you read that book and you're seeing the culture that was built at Netflix, and you're like, you know what, I can do this, or you read a book, you read some of these Ari's books, and you're like, oh, this is how to build a company from scratch. So there's a whole, I think a part of the problem is there's a fallacy around entrepreneurship. Sharing a statistic the other day, only 1.4% of all the books in the world are written by Africans. Only 1.4%. So we don't have a lot of perspectives from ourselves. So, and that's partly our problem. I mean, I think that's something we, somebody like Joram is doing something about it. I'm in research as well. But I think we need to be able to filter out what is not within our context, because some of those books are built in a context that is so different from ours. I was somewhere earlier this year, and in that country, the government, as you finish your university, the government gives you a grant to just polish up an idea you're thinking about, just to help you think as you finish university, and that's the context in which a lot of these books are built. So I think for me, I always, when I talk to guys who are transitioning, I always talk about the myth and the fallacy of entrepreneurship. Be very careful as you read those books, because the context in which they're designed is like, it's like it could be on another planet, honestly.
So as we take into account, as we do all our research, again, we need to remember that 1.4% of these books are written by Africans. So perspective lacks here and there. So we need to also, I'd like to say, take it with a pinch of salt. Take it with a bit of, a pinch of salt here and there, just to make sure that we are not, we're managing the expectations that we set. Because again, like Jerome said, the success we have as we work in business, as we work as an employee, is based on structures and systems that someone has put in place. So your work is just to shine and do your thing. You don't care where is this person coming from, because structures have been set up for you to succeed. The environment has been created. So as you succeed as an entrepreneur, you're the one creating the environment for yourself as well. There's also something to consider in that regard. So there's also the thing about the myth, and banking the myth that that entrepreneurship is easy. You just start. There's also the people who tell us, just start. Is it as easy as just saying, just start, as we say? If I tell Jerome today I am quitting Sandbox, and he'll just say, just start. Is there something you're not telling us as we keep going? Yes, it's just start, but there's 1, 2, 3 I need to look into. As Herbert is working with a startup and trying to help them figure out, is it as simple as just saying, just start?
Okay, I would say the just start needs to happen. It's the ingredient we give everyone who's been toying around with an idea for a very long time, because it also, you can take too long overthinking something and then never getting to the ground or never getting to implement something and learning whether it could work or not. However, I think the transition needs to be considered very carefully. Like we said, you are not the brand you used to work for. You had a certain lifestyle, you had a certain salary, it was guaranteed, at the end of every year. Yes, there's a pressure to perform, but the rules that work on this other side are very different from the rules that work at the workplace. Because at the workplace, as long as you keep your KPIs, keep hitting your targets, keep your performance going, then, they're likely to keep you, unless there's a restructuring that happens somewhere down the line. And so part of what makes people feel like the entrepreneurship side is easier is because more often than not, when you're employed, you're handling a portfolio that is much larger than the small business you're going to start. And so mentally, people think, here I am in my division at Safaricom or PwC or wherever, I handle a business unit worth $1 billion shillings a year. Surely, how difficult can it be to run a business that, has 1, 2, 3 people? It should be a breeze. And so that's a mistake people make. They keep comparing that because they were handling much bigger stuff. Like I mentioned, I came from an international job before I came to set up Sandbox. Here I was, doing deals across several countries, flying from one country to the other. Surely, how difficult can it be to run a small training company in the middle of Nairobi? And so we always mentally tell ourselves that it's going to be easier. What we don't realize is, like I had said, because there were all these support systems. That's what allowed us to do the big things and the brand that we were in. But on this other side, you're literally building all those things from scratch. In fact, there are many times, I'm always amused when someone comes to the realization that before they hire even that first person to work for them, the day they go to that office or that co-working space to start their small business or that business which they're going to build, maybe 10 o'clock reaches and then they realize in the office they used to work in, someone used to bring in the tea. But here, it's them who have to stand up, go to the kitchen, make that cup of coffee, come back and drink it. Then when they're done drinking it, who's going to take it back to the kitchen? And there's nobody who's been hired. So the shock is usually at that level for even the smallest things. Making coffee for myself that used to be brought by somebody else, printing something, printing that proposal, cleaning that office. If you don't have, a setup where somebody is doing the cleaning on your behalf, you will have to do it. And such minute things. Going to pick that check. Yeah, you've done some work for that big company and, they have their 500K check. Who goes to pick it up? You don't have somebody, to go and pick it up, and then who goes and banks it? So there are just so many things that start to bring reality home, that this is not where you are, and you would have to handle and manage all these things. Where it used to be, there's an accountant who would bring for you the accounts, and they're already done. On this other side, you have to figure it out from scratch. And so that can overwhelm a lot of people because you came from handling one function. Now you have to handle accounts, you have to handle HR, you have to handle marketing, you have to handle, operations, you have to handle delivery of the actual product or service. And that can overwhelm a lot of people. And that's why a lot of people will not even make it to the end of the first year because they were just not prepared to deal with the multiplicity of things that come at them.
So now you've come here, now you're the CEO, you're the CMO, you're doing everything, your social media, something that was always an outsourced service for you. So there's the part where now you've transitioned, now you have your business, you need to employ somebody. What is the first function you should employ? Because there are so many things that need to be done. Who is the first person you should employ? Because you have someone in marketing, you have operations, you have finance, you have legal. Who is the first person you should employ and why?
Wendy, I have the perfect answer for you. The first person you employ is yourself.
Oh,
that's exactly what I was going to say. Yes.
So the first
you are employee 01.
Mm-hmm.
You are it. And also, a lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake of not employing themselves, So you're always, on the back foot. You're waiting to employ somebody else. The reality is, Wendy, the question I would ask is, what are you hiring for? Because to be honest, in the first year, it depends what you're doing. And every hire needs to be critically evaluated. But the reality is, you really need to know the business in and out. You have to do HR. In my first 3 years, I did everything. I understand legal in a way that lots of people don't. I don't really need to know some of the stuff I know. I understand procurement. I understand HR. I understand operations. I can build processes from scratch, right? And it's with that knowledge that it becomes easier to then hire, because you know what the gap is. Because as the business grows, you can say, you know what, I want to spend more time client facing. So this thing called HR, let me get a part-time resource to take HR administration away. But I'm against the whole idea of hiring. I think it's one of those fallacies that has been driven by some of our entrepreneurship books that we read. The reality is you need to do the work yourself, because otherwise, how do you then really get to the grips of it? And that's why you'll find for a lot of folks who go straight into hiring, 6 months later, you can't pay. A year later, you can't pay, because the fundamentals of the transition to entrepreneurship, you have no other business other than two things. I always like saying, You are the chief risk officer and you are the chief research officer. You have no other business. Your business is to manage risk and to collect data on where the customers are, what do they want, what are their shifting needs, how do I create a product to match that. Don't distract yourself with all these, other things. You are the chief risk officer, chief research officer.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that there's no one who understands productivity better than an entrepreneur. And that's why, as Herbert is saying, in many cases, even if you feel something is below you or beneath you to do, it would be important for you to carry out those tasks. One, you're understanding just what it takes to deliver the value that you deliver. Two, you're understanding how long it takes to do it. And three, even if you're to get somebody to do that particular task later on, in many cases, they'll be looking to you to guide them on how to be able to do it. And so it might be very difficult to be able to delegate right from the beginning. There are many times, say I'm coaching an entrepreneur, and they are wondering why their employee takes 2 weeks to do something that they do in 30 minutes. What's going on there, and how would you be able to interrogate to be able to tell that this task doesn't actually take 2 weeks, it takes 30 minutes when you do it. And so somebody else maybe with less experience than you, at most it should take 4 hours. Why is it taking 2 weeks? And those are the kind of things that you learn right at the beginning when you do some of these tasks, so that even as you hand them over to someone else to do, you know exactly what it takes. And so who's the first person to hire? What I usually advise people is, when you're doing the tasks, which are the tasks that probably take the longest time to do but add the least value to the entire process. These tend to be more administrative tasks. They tend to be more logistical tasks. They tend to be more paper pushing, and they tend to be the things that don't require a lot of experience, that somebody who has less work experience and maybe even a lesser education can be able to carry out. And so I usually ask people to look at the administrative tasks that they spend a lot of their time doing: the deliveries, the collections, the moving around, the carrying, and those kinds of things, and asking, can you craft a role out of this, or can this be outsourced to a delivery company or somebody who can do the messengerial bits, or those kinds of things that take a lot of time but don't necessarily add a lot of value to the overall business that you're doing. And as you then outsource or hire for the more administrative tasks, then you're able to focus a little bit more on the customer management, the delivery of a product, and, like you said, the research and development. Because also in the first few years of running your business, you really are trying to figure out a product. Even if you copied a product from your former employer or whatever it is, in the context of your business, you'll have to tweak it and adjust it so that it works for you. And so you'd be spending a lot of time taking in customer feedback, reworking on your product, and then delivering the new thing to see if it's working better for the customer.
Okay, so now we have figured out your employee zero, your subject zero. So now there's a part where they support systems around you to help you figure out the transition and how to do it right and all that. And I know at Sandbox we have a product called Kisima. So Kisima is for people who are trying to figure out transitioning into being entrepreneurs. So I'd like Herbert maybe just to talk a bit about Kisima and what it looks like for why Kisima, why develop a product for helping people transition into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, thanks, Lydia. I think what we love about Kisima is that it's built from experience, right? It's built from our joint failures and pains and blood and sweat, right? So, what we try to do is, first of all, change the mindset. I think that usually is the core of where we begin. It's to change the mindset around some of the things we've discussed today, the realities. So we try to paint a picture of potentially this is where you're headed. But even after the mindset is shifted, remember, the reason you're starting a business is because you have identified a problem. And for some of us here, the problem may be something you're already solving as a side hustle, because we also have that, right? The next stage is to validate your idea, you know, figuring out whether this problem you've identified, is it just a hobby? You know, it can be something that you just like doing, you know, but, you know, a hobby is not a business. In fact, a lot of Kenyan businesses are hobbies, to be honest. And the reality is that process of validating or figuring out whether the product you're developing or the service that you're delivering, whether the customer is willing and able to pay. And not family and friends, because family and friends sometimes are a bad barometer of whether you have product market fit. Remember, 50% of the businesses that fail will fail because of poor product market fit. And we've had a ton of examples in Kenya, spectacular failures, you know, of that nature. And a lot of them are linked to, you know, the fact that they had a product that either didn't have a big enough market, or had a market that was too tiny, or a market that was too late or too early. So those are the things that we like to focus on, because if you can get product market fit right, if you can figure out, you know, that, you know what, there's a market of people who are willing to pay for this, they've been suffering and I've come to save them. Yeah, then we can talk about the thing about cash flow, because cash flow is your biggest, that's the one that's running behind you. And you can have an amazing product, an amazing service. If you don't figure out the cash flow conundrum, yeah, you'll be shut down as soon as you started. So part of it is, and I like what Joram said about savings, you know, because savings is not cash flow. Cash flow is what keeps the business going. And sometimes, you know, entrepreneurs confuse cash flow and profit. And as controversial as it sounds, I usually tell folks to prioritize cash flow over profit, because cash flow allows you, it gives you the bandwidth to chase profitability, and not the other way around. You can have invoices stacked until, you know, the top of your office. Yeah, but when the balance in bank is looking not so good, yeah, that profit means absolutely nothing. Yeah, so I think Kisima is a reaction to our learnings as entrepreneurs, but also having interacted with thousands of entrepreneurs and had their stories across multiple sectors. And some of our experience spans across sub-Saharan Africa. So we have certain perspectives of the differences between this country and that developed market and back home. And this is what we've tried to put together.
Yeah, and if I can just add why we developed this Kisima program. It's a lot of us at the Sandbox are that entrepreneur. We had the nice cushy jobs. Then we jumped into entrepreneurship to start a business, consulting firm, and, you know, something of a sort. And basically, a lot of us made those mistakes that we have identified, that a lot of people are likely to make when coming from the scenario of, you know, employment, especially at a very high level, into setting up a business. And what are those mistakes? Number one, many people would tend to leave a job either because they're retiring, either because they have they've been given a package, so the retrenchment has gone on, but they've been given a package by their business as they leave, or maybe, you know, they had been saving to leave. And what all those scenarios have in common is that someone ends up leaving the workplace with a huge ton of cash seated somewhere. Depending on the level of employment you are at, that could be, as you know, a number of millions of shillings that are seated in your pension or your going away package. And what a lot of people will tend to do is pour all that money, 100%, into a business. And it's likely to go into a hypothetical business they've been dreaming about. Maybe it's an equipment they've wanted to buy for a long time. They were on one of their travels in Italy. They saw this machine doing all these amazing things. And by there, I'm describing a real scenario I saw with somebody. And they end up importing that machine for millions of shillings, only for it to land here. And they realize there's no local technician who understands how to get that machine going. So they have to now fly in someone from Italy, house them here for a while, you know, to get it, set it up and get it up and going. And then it starts to produce a product. And at the end of the day, they realize that product that is being produced by that machine actually has no market. And so what ends up up happening is all that money they invested in that machine or that product or that license for a certain, program from abroad does not have any demand. They had not done any market research to know that this business was actually going to work. And so one of the big mistakes people make is on the payout that they get. They invest it into something that ends up not working, and then they have to go back to scratch. And so you can imagine you've worked for 10, 20, 30 years, gotten in these millions in a payout, and then you put that money into something that ends up not working, and then you're back to scratch. So not only don't you have an income, but now you also have to figure out what to do because you've killed that money that was supposed to, help you in your sunset years. And a lot of people can go into depression because, what do you do after that when you're in a situation that's not working? So one of the things that we just try and do is, try and prevent people from putting money into an investment. This is something I think we discussed with Herbert some time back. Someone retired, got this huge payout. I think they had bought some land over time and they wanted to sell all that and put all that money into a ride-hailing cab. I don't know if Herbert remembers that story. And we had to do a lot to convince that guy not to put that money into developers to make a ride-hailing cab. Because first, Kenya just already has a concentration of ride-hailing cabs, and second, I think this year is the first time Uber is profitable. No ride-hailing cab anywhere in the world is profitable, and so it's not necessarily a good idea of a business to go into. So the first thing is to protect whatever assets have been accumulated. Second thing is if they're thinking about a business, is how do they go about thinking an idea that will actually work, that actually has an existing market, that will they actually have the capabilities to go around and sell. Because again, some people come from the place where they were not in the sales department, so someone else did all the sales, so they don't know how to sell. So they might have a good product, but they don't know how to sell and close, and it's something that they may need to learn. And then even if the product is bought, how do you deliver it? How do you, structure the payment plan so that by the time people are paying you, you're making enough to pay for your bills and to pay for, for the raw materials and that kind of thing. So it's just to let people know that there's a lot that actually goes into making a business successful. A successful business is not just a great sounding or idea. Which is the other thing that we talk about a lot. There are a lot of people who think just because they have thought of this brilliant idea, it is going to turn into a brilliant business. Those two are not necessarily correlated. There's a lot that goes into getting the right product, the right service, pricing it right, selling enough volumes to be able to pay yourself, pay the business, pay all your bills, and to be able to make a profit at the end of the day. So we designed this product just to help people systematically go through that, not make the mistakes that can end up being catastrophic, and also maybe just have a smoother experience of being able to identify the right idea, right customers, right pricing, and getting the business up and running in a way that it has a potential to grow, scale, and possibly then even offer a better lifestyle for them than what they did when they were employed. Could be in the area of passion, or it could just be in the area of selling a product or service that works. But Kisima is tailored specific for that to help people make that journey move a bit smoother.
Thank you so much. So it's a cheat sheet. It's a cheat sheet for you to at least do it some way right, if I'm not wrong. Yes. So in the chat, we've put in a link for you to register. So someone from our team at Sandbox will get in touch with you to talk to you and figure out how to do it and how you can get on board for the program. This is just a crash course. This webinar was just a crash course, so that now you can say, okay, fine, I think I have an idea. Now I need to sit down and do Kisima, because it's more practical. You get to listen to what Jerome and Herbert are saying and figure out, learn from the mistakes and how to do it somewhat close to right, and prioritize cash flows over profitability, because as Jerome said, this is the first time Uber is making a profit. So it means profitability might take some time. It's coming. It might take some time, but it's coming. So there's that thing that people don't talk about. The hard part of things where you've done business and you have to move. Like making the tough calls. So what are some of those tough calls that we have to sit down and say, okay, guys, it's not working. It's time to close, instead of stringing people along, suppliers, employees. So what is that? Those are some of those tough calls that you have to just jiite kwa mkutano kidogo and tell yourself, okay, these decisions, what are some of these things, and how can we make sure we can get to those tough conversations that make it difficult for us to do business?
Yeah, yeah, that's such a great question, because yeah, we talk about just start, and we've been talking about this whole journey of figuring out how to remain alive, but before I answer that, I want to talk about 3 statistics, and I think they'll help us contextualize this discussion. 72% of founders, this was a study that was done last year, a bunch of founders were asked a few questions around their businesses, and 72% of founders struggle with mental health. Okay, that's the first one, right? So 72% is a majority, right? That's the first one. The second one is 54% of founders are worried about failure. So every day they wake up, they're worried about failing, right? That's the second one. And then the third one, and this is, I think, the one that worries us the most, is that 77% of founders refuse to seek qualified professional help. So if you put those 3 statistics in context, it paints a picture of I cannot fail. It is not possible. So the whole concept of creating a stop point where you call yourself into a meeting, like you're saying, that doesn't quite exist, because you can't go backwards. Even when you fail, you don't fail. You've learned, that's a very sort of Silicon Valley thing, by the way, the whole idea of fail forward. You can't fail forward if the business is shut down, and you won't be able to. Anyway, that's a story for a different day. But I think the whole idea of knowing when to pause or knowing when to stop, I think a big part of it comes from being able to plan. And we usually say, what's not inspected is not respected. If you don't have a goal that we're going for, I think it becomes very difficult to know when things are not going right. So I always advocate, through the Kisima program, that's something that we've built in, the whole idea of planning, but not planning like the way you used to do corporate, where we, come up with a nice 3-year projection, nice 3-year plan. We know how things are going to be. You've got a whole team of researchers who go and, do the sensitivity analysis for you and that kind of thing. So we'll do the plan, we'll help you come up with an annual plan, maybe that kind of thing. But I think the power for us is we go down to the basics. We call it, you only look 90 days ahead, because as an entrepreneur, you work in sort of monthly cycles anyway, and even a little less, sometimes weekly cycles. So as you can see, it's a big transitional shift as an entrepreneur, moving from, employment where it's sort of very focused around quarters and months. Now we're talking about weeks, because the reality is that people will get paid at different times. You will get paid at different times as well. You'll be able to pay some people, maybe you won't be able to pay certain people. So the only way you'll know when to pause, the only time you'll know when to make a call, is if you had put certain post signs on your road. You had certain signs that say, you know what, maybe by year 1, I should be in and around this place. I should be able to at least pay myself 50,000 shillings, right? If you don't have a place where you're able to mark that out, then you're just gliding, you're flowing. And a lot of entrepreneurs are just gliding or flowing. So you need to have certain signposts that say, and I always advocate nothing more than 3 metrics, not more than 3 signposts that say, by year 1, by month 6, by month 3, I need to be here. Not crazy statistics and crazy metrics, just something like revenue, cash flow position. I don't know what Joram would add, but for me, those are usually the big 2. Maybe feedback from customers, right? In terms of product market fit. Those would be the priority. And if you see things are not going right, that's the point where you call yourself into a meeting and say, what do we need to do? And if you keep having those meetings often, yeah, maybe it's time for a bigger meeting. But I want to end this question with something that we find really practical and we have integrated into Kisima, is the whole idea of having a shadow advisory board. And these are a group of peers who have been there, potentially done it, who, you know, you meet every month, you just buy them some mandazi and some tea, and they are your sounding board. Because sometimes it is a very lonely journey. It's something that, you know, will take a toll on you. You need a group of people who are not really invested per se. They're only invested in your success as a human being, and maybe not as an entrepreneur, and they want you to do well, right? So I always advocate you need 3 people, 5 people maximum, who you sit with every month, kind of like the way chamas work, and they are your sounding board. You're presenting to them. I wanted to be here, but I am not here. You know, that kind of accountability. Yeah, Jeremiah, I don't know whether, you know, that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. We're actually at an entrepreneurship conference called Sunculp, and earlier in the day, there's 3 of us who were just recounting our journey as entrepreneurs. Um, all of us, you know, seemingly having come from very high-profile positions and the like, but just discussing the realities of, yes, you might have worked for Oracle, you might have worked for Visa, and all these sorts of things, but now the reality of building a business is very different. Like Herbert says, it's very lonely. People don't understand. We were even making jokes around the fact that sometimes you can't even, like, you have to build a lot of resilience when you hang out with your employed friends, because them every time you meet at this joint, everyone is packing new cars. You still have to keep fixing and taping up that old one, because you can't buy a new one, and there's no way you're going to afford one anytime soon. And so there are those psychological moments where you're calling yourself to a meeting for, can I really afford to even go for this hangout with these guys at this particular joint, where you know you'll not spend less than 5K on food and drinks and that kind of thing. And so there are a lot of things you just kind of have to keep juggling in your head, realizing that you may have to make lifestyle changes for your dream to come to pass. You may have to, you know, put in longer hours than you had assumed. A lot of people think that because you work for yourself, you can just wake up anytime and go to work. Shock on you, you actually probably end up spending more time at the office than you did even for your employer. And there are just so many things you have to adjust to. And so you have to be ready for that psychological journey. It's probably why Herbert said, you know, a lot of people struggle with mental health issues because there's a lot of stress that you're dealing with on a continuous basis. There's a lot of things you have to keep juggling in your head and balancing out and trying to see, you know, how do we just make it to the end of this month? It's 26th, there's no money in the account and I have people to pay. You know, that can be significant stress on an individual. And so basically, how do you build a support structure that can carry you through those lonely days, that can carry you through those tough times, that can give you creative ideas, you know, at the times when things are really not going according to plan. There's quite a number of things you probably have to structure around yourself just so that you can safely go through this thing. If I was to add anything to the markers that you are succeeding, like he said, its revenue is growing, profitability is improving, you're making less and less mistakes, you're improving, you know, the rate at which money comes in every month in the business. Some things are very intrinsic where you can tell, you know, we are making progress. This graph is on an upward, but usually that graph has to be on an upward such that the return comes in faster than the effort you're putting in, so that you don't spend too much time trying to make something work, but it's taking away from you more than it's giving to you. And so, yeah, but I always say, as long as that graph is on the up and up, and you can project that you will break to that profitability, you're paying, you know, yourself well before you hit burnout or before you hit brokenness or, you know, before you run out of runway. Those are probably the things to look out for that could build more success than failure in future.
Okay, thank you so much. So as we carry on with the session. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll pick them up and answer them before we close the session. If you have any questions, any comments, please put them in the chat. The team will pick them up and will answer them. And something that both of you have said is having accountability partners. As you have accountability partners in everything, I think it's just equally important to have accountability partners as you're doing business, so that, like, you have two friends you can hold hands with and say, okay, we're doing this together. And vulnerability, because again, I think something Joram mentioned is that if you hang out with your employed friends, you find that you guys are able to afford some of these things, but it's also the vulnerability of just being honest and saying that, guys, I can't spend 20,000 today because I have a business and point X, Y, and Z. So having that kachama to keep you accountable, as Herbert said, and just being also very honest with yourself and saying, okay, it's not working. I've introspected. I have called myself for a meeting, and this is what needs to be done, and knowing when to ask for help. As Herbert put for us the statistics, it's quite sad. This is over 50% in all these three categories. So what can we do to make this statistics come to 20%, 20%, 15, 30, and all that. So there's also, based on now the reality of things, that it's not easy. It's not something that is that easy to do. So what are some of the hacks that you have employed over the years to make the journey a bit easier, a bit easier to navigate for you, so that you don't die alone, and you and your people who are doing business together make sure you all make it to the top and you see the sun?
I like that. Well, the reality is not all your friends will make it to the top of the mountain to see the sun. Maybe you can see the sun from the bottom of the mountain. There's no harm in that as well.
Yes.
But I think Joram mentioned it in passing. I would love to just spend a bit more time talking about it. The whole idea of surrounding yourself with people who are doing it. This is something that if I could go back, I would change this almost immediately. I think a big part of the people I would.
Hi, Herbert. I don't know if we lost you there for a bit.
Hey, Wendy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was just saying that a big part of where I really struggled is the company I kept. Just because it was my background. I'd spent more than 10 years in corporate. All my friends and colleagues and advisors were all in corporate. And even 3 years later, they were still in corporate. And they would not understand for the life of me why I would not be able to do certain things. Don't forget the stress that, the journey puts on your family as well. They don't have the same stresses. Up to last year, I was still probably working 100-hour weeks, and people read about those things and they sound, ridiculous. But the reality is you are constantly thinking about your business, and that's why it's really stressful. It helps if you have a community of people who are going through the same journey, because guess what? They're going through it too. They have certain hacks, certain things that they're doing to cope. And it would be really important for anybody here who is trying to go through this journey to think of the same. But the second one, and that's why Kisima is here, is shortcut the process, work with experts, work with people who have gone through the journey, work with people who have created a framework, a model that can help you shortcut the process, so that you just keep 2-3 years of that journey and you go deep into where you really need to focus on. That would be my advice, in terms of how to lessen the impact. It doesn't mean it will still not be difficult. It will still be tough. But the reality is it will be maybe on a cushioned mattress.
Yeah, I agree with her, but a lot of the things that lengthen the journey a lot is just the mistakes you make along the way, and it's mistakes that you'd never have been able to foresee. It's just
Hi, Jerome. We lost you a bit there. I don't know.
stuff you don't know.
Okay.
You find out you're supposed to pay it, and you're ready. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I was just saying that, a lot of the mistakes are things you just don't know. And by the time you find out about them, like there's one time I think we found out about taxes we should have been paying that we hadn't paid, and you've already accumulated arrears. Those are the kind of things that hold you back. On another front, we realized that there's taxes we were paying that we should not have been paying, and so we had tax credits, and that came from working with a tax consultant who helped us to identify those things. So I agree with Herbert that having mentors, people who've been entrepreneurs before, who can just help advise you here and there on small mistakes that you shouldn't make, that can set you back quite a bit. Lifestyle is another thing. Just choosing, to put your lifestyle at a place you can afford, so that it doesn't put a lot of pressure on the business. So which school your kids go to, where you live in Nairobi, and those kinds of things are decisions to make early, so that you don't end up pressuring yourself too much. And yeah, those are the kind of things that I would be thinking about.
Okay, thank you. So I think maybe just a bit of a segue. I think at Sandbox there's that community, because I think as my colleague Emily mentioned at the beginning, we host 37 different business owners, all the simple entrepreneurs. So some, one way or another, they'll meet themselves in the corridor, they'll chat, okay, what are you doing? Where are you getting this amazing employees, or what are you doing? So there's also that aspect of community that Joram is building here at Sandbox that ensures that we all at least make it to the top of the mountain, as I mentioned earlier, not to see the sun at the bottom, that we all see the sun at the top of the mountain. And I think that's a good thing, and more communities, like for people to be a part of and hold your hand and keep you accountable, and all these things. And I think it's really great. So that's something. Look for your community, find your tribe, find your community to help you, keep you accountable, and give you also reality checks and tell you the hard truths. So we'll jump right into the questions. There's a question from Anne. Thank you so much, Anne, for your question. With the obvious challenges businesses can present, what is it that makes one know or insist that they want to be an entrepreneur and not an employee? That is question 1 from Anne. And question 2, is entrepreneurship intrinsic or a learned art?
How about, do you want to go first, or?
Yeah.
I'm
calculating.
Yeah, I
But
know.
that second question is it hit me, because it's yeah, and you're thinking like a scientist now. I like it. You're a behavioral scientist at this point. Is entrepreneurship intrinsic or learned? I think it's learned. The idea of it being intrinsic implies that it's for some people. Some people are born with it. I don't think so. And this is from experience. I don't think I had it. I don't think a bunch of people I know who are entrepreneurs were born with it, but they have learned it, right? They have gone through the school of hard knocks and they have learned it. So that's what we need to avoid, right? And the whole idea of shortcutting the process is reducing the learning journey, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it is learned.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the first part of the question. What is it that makes one know or
I
insist
agree.
they want?
It is learned, and
Sorry.
okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the first part of the question, I'll go to the first part of the question, but I was just reiterating that yes, and entrepreneurship is learned, and those who succeed learn quickest, are open to learning, not those who walk in thinking they know everything. I think from where I've come from, I see those are the ones who suffer the most, because they go through being humbled quite a bit and quite quickly by the market. But what makes people become entrepreneurs? I think some people feel unemployable. For me, throughout my entire employment, I always felt environments I was in were curtailing me from being able to go all out and do certain things on a larger scale and maybe better. And so there are people who, when they're in employment, they feel like that. They feel like there's this thing that could be done better, and the organization's policies don't allow them to, tackle those opportunities, and so they go out and set up something. End up entrepreneurs, they get fired at something, or they start doing something and it takes off, and then they end up running after it. But I think one of the things that I've seen cut across most entrepreneurs is that they're just very passionate about making a difference and doing something different, and bringing a difference to this world that doesn't currently exist. And so a lot of people do it out of passion.
Okay, so passion in making a difference. I think that's also just a big driving force of I want to be different. I want to do things differently. That's quite big motivation for people to jump into entrepreneurship. So the next question is, my question is on what I would term as a family business, and you coming into it from employment is by expanding the already existing but small business. What should you have in mind, and what will be the priorities as you seek to expand it?
So the question of family business, I think is a fairly unique one. Remember, majority of businesses, SMEs, I would say, SMEs are in Kenya are mostly family businesses or family-oriented businesses. So this is a fairly common phenomenon. The idea that, maybe the business has been ongoing, the folks have been involved, they started it 15, 20, 25 years ago, it took you to school, but now, they're transitioning, they maybe don't have the energy anymore, they want other people to take it on, and you have this opportunity, right? The thing to realize about a family business is family businesses are built around different fundamentals. Unlike maybe something that you'd start from scratch, family businesses are built around the concept of family. And family has its own issues and politics, and that's just something you need to consider. But the biggest thing I've seen, having dealt with hundreds of family businesses, is structure. The reason family businesses don't transition, the reason why, I keep asking Joram, name for me 5 Kenyan businesses that have transitioned over the last 50 years. You struggle getting to maybe 10. At that point now you're just fiddling. It's because we don't have the structure. We don't employ structure within these businesses. So as somebody who is transitioning from employment, the big thing you need to figure out is structure. How do you integrate some level of structure as you are still in employment? And maybe you're doing this on the weekends, you're doing it in the evenings, you get somebody to start working on structure, because structure is what kills family business. I had a client last year. They have a family business that's been running. It's doing animal feeds. They're doing quite well. They've been doing well. She's coming in from employment. She used to work in a big accounting firm. She understands how to run a business, at least, from the stuff that she used to do at, the accounting firm. But what frustrated her the most was the idea that, an uncle could come in and make a tactical decision and, shift the entire business in another direction overnight. Why? Because there is no structure, right? So just something to think about, I think, with family business for me has always been the concept of structure, and mindset as well, that we're running a business, it's in the common good, we're trying to make this thing bigger. And that's partly why family businesses, one, are not able to transition, but also not able sometimes to attract professional capital, because they're just not built and structured to do so.
Yeah. And I would add, because I've worked with a few, family businesses, first of all, are primed to succeed a lot faster than starting from scratch. And so some of the things to ask yourself is, what have they done well over the years? What is in the DNA of this organization that kept it going all this time? There's usually certain nuggets of positive things that you can build up upon. It could be the philosophy of the business. It could be how they're always thinking ahead of time and investing in things, and you can institutionalize some of these things. And then the second thing, after looking at history and seeing what is possible, is what's the vision going forward? Where can this business go? How can we build up on it from where it is currently to professionalize it and take it to the next level. And then now, once you're clear on vision, and maybe it's good if you come up with that as a family, then you can start to implement the different things. It might call for a rebrand to modernize, how the business is working from a perception point of view. It may call for putting in IT systems because maybe it's not automated, and by putting in technology, you might bring in a lot of efficiency. It might call for a review of operations and an overhaul of operations. It may call, for restructuring how people are, structured inside the business. There's so much that can happen, but in my opinion, all the clients I've worked with who are family business, second generation that was given a free hand to do stuff, they were able to 10x the business within 2 to 3 years very easily. They already have bank relationships. They're not struggling to get loans. They're not struggling to get financing. Their parents have a track record of repaying and that kind of thing. And so I saw so much faster growth in the family businesses than I saw in the one starting from zero.
Okay, thank you so much. And just before we take our last question, there's a Google form. We've talked about Kisima during this session, which is, I'll call it a cheat sheet for people who want to transition from employment to entrepreneurship. We'll put the Google form in the chat again, one more time for you to fill it in. If there are any questions, you can reach out to us. And our email address will be put on the chat as well for those who have questions. And all the details will be put in the chat, so please make sure you fill in the form and someone from our team will reach out to you. And our last question is from Anthony. Thank you so much, Anthony, for your question. And it asks, at what stage should a startup begin to look for funding, e.g. pre-seed funding, seed funding, etc., and what funding should one take? Funding is known to sometimes kill startups. What happens?
Yeah, I mean, the issue of funding, again, this is one of those where we need to be very careful how we tackle it. Here's the ground rule. I mean, here's the basic principle. As an entrepreneur, your first investor has to be your customer. Yeah, simple as that. Your first investor is your customer, because it's the ultimate indicator of some level of product market fit, right? It's the idea that you've got something that the customer is willing and able and crying for. They want to pay for it because they need it. But the second piece is around, raising capital. You talked about the idea of raising capital. There's a misconception that there's a cloud, for example, there's a cloud hanging over Nairobi with millions of dollars waiting for entrepreneurs to just jump high enough, you'll be able to get it. There's a lot of money flowing around. And while that may be partly true, because Nairobi, Lagos, and Cape Town are sort of the hubs of entrepreneurship across the region. So investors will generally levitate around these three ecosystems. It is just not designed for you, especially as a first-time founder, especially in this African context, especially if you are just starting out. Remember, if you raise capital, and if you manage to raise capital, what position are you raising from? You have almost zero leverage. And remember, you're not in Silicon Valley, so you don't have a patent. Patents don't mean much in this part of the world. You're not going to monetize a patent. But you know what you'll monetize? You know what you can leverage? Traction. And what is traction? Product market fit. What does that mean? Cash flow, right? So I always, say, raising capital can't be, and unfortunately, I worked for a company that folded because of, as part of my entrepreneurship journey. I worked for a company that chased raising capital almost as a goal in itself. And, if you need any more evidence, look at the last 3-4 years in Nairobi. How many companies have folded as a result of chasing capital, almost as an end in itself? So bottom line is focus on customer, raise money from the customer, meaning the customer is paying for the thing. And then you'll gradually levitate towards, the idea that somebody else can come and put their money in. And also, don't forget, it will give you a stronger position on the negotiating table, right? Because then what are you've got some leverage. You say, listen, we've got 1,000 customers and they're paying us this much money every month. Look at my books, look at my cash flow. That is a brilliant position to be angling from. Lastly, let me just talk about traditional capital, so your banks, circles, and the like. I would highly, advise against going for bank loans. Bank loans are not designed for you at this stage, not really. Maybe the point at which bank loans are designed for is from SME going onwards, and even that's a really good SME. Bank loans were never designed for you, and they will never, regardless of what you hear, they're just not built for you. The risk profile did not account for somebody like you as a first-time founder, as a small business. So you wanna either focus on family and friends, hopefully, and focus on the customer as well.
Okay, Joram?
Yeah, I would just quickly, so overrated. I have bootstrapped, I have raised capital, and both times I was almost okay. So capital is really overrated. I have a product or service that has a big enough market share. Are you selling? Are people paying? Are you collecting? Are you banking? That money that comes from customers is really the most important thing that you should be very focused on. And if you have customers paying you in an increasing nature, then the capital will come chasing after you. That's generating cash flow positively and growing fast, and that's people want to be success. So people who somehow have raised money without that component being in place, certain businesses globally maybe are able to do that. But in many cases, people want to see so keep growing, and you have a big enough market that when you get that investor, they'll be able to get a return, and you'll be able to be left with a good portion of the company to also make a return.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Herbert and Joram, and for everyone who's given us questions and participating in the webinar tonight. For transitioning from employment to entrepreneurship. We have listened, we have taken notes. I have 3 pages of notes in counting on everything I have learned from this session, and maybe even make an informed decision if I ever want to transition to become an entrepreneur. So thank you so much, Joram and Herbert. Parting shot from the both of you before we can call it a night and say thank you. So certainly,
yeah, I mean, for me, okay, Joram, go first.
Yes.
Yeah, I would just say don't make your transition more painful than it needs to be. Don't kill yourself making that transition, and don't lose everything making that transition. It can be done better. It can be done in a way that has a bit more predictable success, and it can be done a bit smoother, such that it doesn't have to destroy everything that you've worked so hard to build to date. So yeah, looking forward, if you're in that stage, please reach out to us. We'll be happy to walk the Kisima journey with you and have you walk towards success a bit easier.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, from my end, I think the parting shot would be entrepreneurship is beautiful. Regardless of everything you hear, it is an extremely beautiful, and challenging journey. The knowledge exists of how to maneuver. There is absolutely no need to reinvent the wheel. Jump onto whatever is already there. We've designed this program, Kisima, with you in mind. So we'd love to have you on board and walk you through this journey so that, 3-4 years from now, we can be on that proverbial mountain of Wendy's and we are all looking at, is it a sunrise or a sunset? I love it either way.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you have any questions, please write to us. Our email address is in the chat box, karibu@sandboxgroup.com. You can visit us at CMS Africa House on the ground floor along Chania Avenue. We'll be very happy to support you in your business journey, because that is what we do at Sandbox, together with experts like Herbert, who work with startups to ensure that we get to the top of the mountain. And, we are chasing greatness as we go into entrepreneurship. And may we all one day see, as Herbert is saying, entrepreneurship is beautiful. My name is Wendy. I've been your moderator. Thank you so much, and see you on our next webinar in a week or 2 weeks' time. Once again, someone has asked to share the email address, karibu@sandboxgroup.com. I'll share it again. Someone from our team will share it again in the chat before we close the session in 3 minutes. Yes, thank you so much. If there are any questions, write to us. We'll be happy to support you. And thank you. Yes, Anthony, the email address is in the chat. I hope you can see it. Okay, thank you so much, guys, and have a lovely evening and the rest of your week.
Bye, everybody.